I'll get us started while I see that there are many of us still streaming into the meeting. But I just want to begin by welcoming you all to the first Tuesday lunch talk, our now well-established CESTA seminar series. And but this is that takes place over the lunch hour and now in this Zoom space during this quarter. And I'm I'm Giovanna Cesarani. I am the CESTA faculty director. And I just want to let me briefly say what a pleasure it is to continuing seeing our community coming together. And now in this regular term time way to convene for talks that really we mean to feature exciting and trailblazing work that's happening in the digital humanities at Stanford and beyond. It's really just good to see you all here in this Zoom mode that continues and also speaks and represents that these are difficult times and they continue to be difficult. And so all the more it's just wonderful to see you all here. And today we will be hearing from the Poetic Media Lab, which is one of the foundational labs at CESTA that under the directorship of Professor Amir Eshel has been since 2014 really pushing us to think hard and deep about how the new digital age in which we live with the tools, wonderful advantages and also constraints that it offers us can be a place where we really rethink what the aesthetic experience is. How can we really engage with the objects that are the focus of our work as humanists and academics. So you will hear more from the lab itself, how they go about this. Before that, though, I want to introduce a very important person for us at CESTA and for the series, and that's Nika Mavrodi, who is a PhD student in English and CESTA graduate fellow. And Nika has accepted the very essential for all of us positions of events and programming coordinator. And so she will be guiding us today and also be the lightening, the light that shows us the way ahead for the further CESTA seminars events this quarter and this year. So I leave it to Nika now. Thank you, Nika, for doing this for us. Thank you.
Hi, Giovanna. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I'm Nika. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate in the Department of English, and I'll be working with CESTA this quarter to help coordinate the lunchtime seminar series. We're thrilled to welcome the Poetic Media Lab to our first lunchtime seminar of the year. Founded in 2013 by Professor Amir Eshel, the Poetic Media Lab is an interdisciplinary humanities lab that uses computational approaches to collaborative meaning making in an information systems world. At our next lunchtime seminar on October 6th, it's called Distant Reading the Law. Dr. Hanjo Hamann will share his results from applying text mining approaches to the black box of legal education in Germany. On October 20th, Dr. Christina Hodge will present Modeling Mesoamerica, Origins and Opportunities in a Digital Exhibit. On November 3rd, which is Election Day, Professor Shane Denson is sharing insight on the acceleration of the image world in the algorithmic regime. The title of his presentation comes from his new book, Discorrelation or Images Between Algorithms and Aesthetics. More details will come on a public outreach event we're hosting later in the quarter with Professor Gordon Chang on the Chinese Railroad Workers Project. We'll also be sharing more details on a new programming initiative Laura Stokes is developing on graduate education in DH. So that's what's ahead for the quarter. And so today we're very happy to welcome the Poetic Media Lab, and I think that's Nelson Schumacher.
Oh, hi, everyone. So I'll just give a quick introduction to Professor Eshel. Professor Eshel is Edward Clark Crosset Professor of Humanistic Studies here at Stanford. He's a professor of German Studies and Comparative Literature, and as of last year, he's the director of CompLit and its graduate program. His research focuses on contemporary literature and the arts as they touch on philosophy, specifically on memory, history, political thought, and ethics. Professor Eshel is the author or editor of several books in English, Hebrew, and German, and most recently of Poetic Thinking Today, published last year by Stanford University Press. He's also the faculty director of the research group on the contemporary and of the Poetic Media Lab at CESTA. And with that, I'll pass the word to Professor Amir Eshel. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Giovanna and Amanda, for inviting us and hosting us. It's a great pleasure and wonderful to see you. Unfortunately, not in person, but at least we have the virtual platform to see you on this lunch event today. Thank you also, Nika, for coordinating and navigating us through the session. It's great to be here. I'll briefly tell the story of the Poetic Media Lab and then give the word onward to Nelson, who will guide us through the various projects through the recording. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and take us to the presentation over here. So the Poetic Media Lab began actually slightly earlier than 2013. It started from a conversation Todd Presner, who is now at UCLA, and I have about what new technology and new media affords us in higher education. This conversation led us to the Greek notion of poesis, which translates roughly into making or creating, and to the idea that new technology and new media allows us also to create new forms of research, new forms of knowledge and knowledge dissemination, which we never had before. And with this thought in mind, we thought about the ways in which new technologies allow us to engage in cultural history, specifically the cultural history of the city of Berlin, because both of us were interested in Berlin's cultural history at that time. And with this came the first project to be the project you see here in front of you on this slide. It was a course I taught at that time called Berlin, the City as Body, the City as Metaphor. And we used an elaborate website to present Berlin's cultural history using what we then called layering technique, in which you go to a Berlin map and you can trace the various historical layers in Berlin while using new technology and new media. This project was in that time within the framework of what was the predecessor of CESTA, one of the predecessors of CESTA, namely the Stanford Humanities Laboratory, led then by Jeffrey Schnapp, who is now at Harvard. Todd Presner left Stanford. He was a graduate student. He left Stanford and took a position at UCLA and turned our project on Berlin into a much broader new approach to urban history and urban cultural history and thinking about cities writ large with a project called Hyper Cities, Thick Mapping in the Digital Humanities. You see here on the slide the website created for this project at Harvard University Press. And you also see here at the bottom the book that came out of it, namely Hypercities, which brought together the insight the various participants in this project gathered while working on it. Out of it and with it came to be also the program in urban humanities that is now a part of the Mellon Foundation's kind of overall project series. The next chapter in the history of the lab goes back indeed to the year 2013 Together with Brian Jonsrud, then we created the Poetic Media Lab in its current iteration. And the idea was to take this notion of poesis, of creating and making, onto the next level with various projects under the same umbrella. Brian, together with Mike Widener and Daniel Bush, who I saw before, is joining us today. Hi, Daniel, and thanks for joining us. Created Lacuna. Lacuna is a platform of annotation in real time. The idea was to allow students who participate in a seminar to annotate texts, images, videos, etc., both while being in the same room, taking whatever seminar they're taking, or when they're home reading or viewing whatever materials they do. And then not just to annotate whatever is in front of them, but also to annotate each other's work, thus to create a kind of living laboratory of discussion which takes place both before a session takes place, during the session of a seminar, and also after the session. This was a fantastic project which yielded a variety of classes at Stanford and elsewhere, and brought many interesting collaborations, not just within higher education in the context of the 4 years college and universities, but also in the context of community colleges, which we found very exciting and very important as well. Other projects around the same time included the project on Crusade memory in Iraq, which brought together various approaches to Iraq's history, but also to the chapter of Iraq's occupation by the United States, and the ways in which the memory of the Crusades plays in various ways in politics, in ethnic conflict in Iraq, etc. The other project you see here on the slide is called Layered Translation. The idea there was to think of translation not as a clear transference of a text from the original into the target language, but to present various modes of presentation in real time to whoever engaged in translating a poem or a prose work, and to expose in real time the various ways one can translate, be it a word, a phrase, a paragraph, and so on. During the entire time in which Lacuna, Crusade Memory in Iraq, and Layered Translation took place, the one project I personally was involved in more than others because of my own interests was the project Poetic Thinking, a project in which students who participate in whatever intellectual activity, it can be a seminar, it can be a conversation, it can be a learning group, share their insights and work with each other on one single platform. So to take the best social media offers us without the noise we find on platforms such as Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and so on, and to use the aspects of social media which allow communication and debate and discussion also within the context of the academy. I'll share with you one of the sites we created, a site of a course I'm teaching at the moment on Hannah Arendt's work. And as you see here, various students post on Poetic Thinking on this platform their work and share their work with other students in various ways. Not only do they share their work, but as you see here in this example, they also have the possibility to react to each other's posts. Here in the discussion part of this particular post and all other posts as well, you can see that students not only share their own thinking and creative work, but also react to each other. And what emerges is a very rich, multi-layered conversation, which I think enriches the pedagogical experience tremendously in any given time. But in the context of COVID-19, I've seen it in the winter, I've seen it in the spring of last year, what happens when you use poetic thinking alongside with Zoom is the educational experience becomes much richer and much more meaningful for both students and those who instruct them. My various insights in using the various platforms and projects you've seen before was also very important for me when I wrote Poetic Thinking Today, the book that Nelson kindly mentioned before. I would not have written this book without the experiences I made in the Poetic Media Lab, working with graduate students, working with undergraduate students, and seeing how they take the ancient Greek notion of poesis, of making and creating, and bring it together with new technology and new media to create exciting and meaningful digital projects today. So the bottom line for me is to say that the entire history of the Poetic Media Lab from 2001 until today is really the history of the students, the graduate students and the undergraduate students who took part in this adventure. They really make the Poetic Media Lab what it is. And I find it personally one of the most exciting things I've done in my intellectual career since I finished graduate school way back. So on this note, I'd like to thank all of the students who participated thus far and invite those who may be listening today and get inspired to join our ranks and be a part of this exciting journey. And on this note, I'll stop sharing and give the word on to Nelson, I believe. If I only find the right button to stop sharing, that's always the issue. Okay, stop sharing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Amir. So just a quick explanation. So, we have quite a few projects in the Poetic Media Lab now, and we decided to actually do a video recording of like small presentations about each project. Just because we have people who are, literally like scattered all over the world, and for just to make the time zones work. So on that note, I'll just pass it on to Nika, who's going to display the video, and then we'll be back. Many of us actually who are in those video presentations are actually here now, and so we'll be available for a Q&A afterwards. So thank you.
To add to that, Nelson, hi everybody, this is Faiza. Just to add to that, if you have questions, please post them on chat as you listen to our presentations, and we will moderate them and answer them after the end of the presentation. So feel free to, ask away in chat. Yeah. Thank you. And over to Nika.
Yes, over to screen.
Hi everyone, my name is Nelson Schumacher and I'm a PhD student in the Department of Comparative Literature.
Hi everyone, I'm Farah Bazi. I'm a PhD student in the History Department.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellis Schrieffer, a PhD student in the Department of Iberian and Latin American Cultures. And together we are the 3 project managers of Life in Quarantine, Witnessing Global Pandemic.
So back in March, as numbers in the Bay Area were rising and the shelter-in-place order came in, the 3 of us were forced to acknowledge, along with all of you, the drastic ramifications of the pandemic and how our lives were forced to change.
We thought that by documenting these personal accounts of the pandemic, it would not only help us to better understand what we were all going through, but it would also help demonstrate to ourselves and others the sheer global reach of this pandemic. This is how our project, Life in Quarantine, Witnessing Global Pandemic, started.
The central goal of our project is to collect individual stories of people's diverse experiences of the pandemic around the world, written by the people themselves. Because participation is voluntary, the content is self-selected and presented anonymously to encourage freedom of expression. Moreover, we do not edit the stories. Thus, we're gradually creating a corpus of text from these volunteer submissions that could someday be useful for research and analysis.
From the get-go, it was clear that given the global scope of the pandemic, our archive could not be represented solely in English. Therefore, we reached out to a global audience by making our submission forms available in different languages. And so far, our form has been translated into 10 languages with more on the way. And our archive now includes hundreds of stories from over 30 countries. And when you go to our website, you will see a map that visualizes where our stories come from exactly, like the map behind me, and the green pins represent a cluster of stories while the orange ones reflect a single story. And our aim is that our map will eventually be filled with pins all over the world.
Ultimately, our commitment lies in representing as many experiences as possible from as many communities as possible. Our entire project really hinges on this community participation, which leads me to talk about our spectacular team of a whopping 29 people. This includes not only the 3 of us, but also 7 Stanford undergrads, 3 community college students, as well as 8 external partners and 8 Stanford collaborators, all of whom are working tirelessly on different facets of our project.
And while the center of the project revolves around the archive, our amazing team has helped us expand into a community resource, featuring the works of podcasters, writers, poets, artists, bloggers, educators, community organizers, and activists. Learn more about our project at liqproject.org and help grow the archive by sharing your own personal story. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Hello, everyone. I'm Faiza Parviz. I'm a graduate student at Stanford, and I'm also one of the co-directors at the Poetic Media Lab. I'm thrilled to present my project, Astronomical Data Collection in the Medieval and Early Modern Islamicate World. This Poetic Media Lab project is a digital accompaniment to my master's thesis. In my thesis, I'm researching the influence of Arabic and Persian star catalogs, also known as sigils, on European astronomy. In particular, I'm investigating the 17th century Oxford astronomer John Greaves' discovery and translation of the sigils. First, I want to introduce what is a sig. A sig is a comprehensive star catalog that contains the location of stars and planets in the sky. There are a couple of famous observatories in the Islamicate world that produce renowned sigils. The first well-known sig is from the Maraka Observatory, Sig el-Kahani. And the second prominent sig is from the Samarkand Observatory, Sig Sultani. So for my project, I have created a web edition of the 15th century sig, Sig Sultani. You can view this edition on the website link shown on this slide. I aim for this edition to be scholarly as well as accessible to someone with no knowledge of Arabic. I envision this web edition to be used as a teaching tool for students to learn about the history of Islamic astronomy, especially since this history has largely been omitted from textbooks. Now, for the rest of the talk, I will highlight a few current features of this web edition, as well as some future enhancements that I envision. Like any scholarly edition, it includes an introduction with footnotes, as well as list of further readings. I have used Project Mirador to display the full edition of the manuscript that I'm using for my web edition. I have also transcribed and translated a part of the introduction to the text, and I have also included my editorial policy. Now I will discuss the future enhancements. I'm very much interested in digital storytelling and annotation tools. I want this web edition to be interactive to make the reading an active learning experience for the audience. For this reason, I'm investigating interactivity and annotation tools in the following projects: Project Mirador, Story Maps, and Stories. I want the web edition to become a finding aid for all the editions of Sig Sultani in libraries across the world. There are apparently hundreds of editions of this sig, and I want to make it easier for the researcher to find these editions with accurate metadata. Hence, there are a few research questions that emerge from collecting all of this sig data. How many of these sigils are digitized? Who was editing and translating these star catalogs? How widespread was their influence? And I hope to address these questions in my thesis research. Thank you so much for your time, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions or comments.
Hi there, I'm Em Southerton, and I'm a third-year doctoral candidate at Stanford's Graduate School of Education, where I study learning sciences and technology design and curriculum and teacher education in writing classrooms. I'm excited to share a little bit of my research with you here today. I'll be talking about my area of interest just so you can get to know me better, 3 projects I've been working on for the past 2 years, conference presentations where you can read about the findings, and what's next. So one question that has guided all of my studies here is, how do we design and enact equitable learning experiences? And how do we promote youth voice through creative writing and technology? In these 3 studies, I'll look at student learning through podcast creation, through student use of speech-to-text as a compositional tool, and through student self-publication of poetry online. So in my first study, called Doing Justice for an Audience of One, Motivation to Revise When Students Write for Podcasts, I conducted a 1-year qualitative study of 1 high school English classroom as students learned to write by a podcast for the first time. I addressed the following research questions. What are the affordances and constraints of podcasting in a writing class? How might various audiences, including an audience of 1, influence students' motivation to write and revise? This paper ended up being my qualifying paper, which I defended in the spring under the direction of Sarah Levine and John Walensky, my advisors. In my second project, called Say Your Ideas and Look at Me Weird, How High School Students Respond to Speech-to-Text as a Compositional Tool, I worked with Sarah Levine and Shaolin Sia to conduct a 1-year mixed method study of 6 high school English classrooms as students composed with speech-to-text. I'll let you take a second to look at these research questions. Finally, in a multi-year project with the Poet Warriors Project, I conducted a study which was a text analysis of a corpus of over 2,000 student poems written between the years 2015 and 2018 and published on the Poet Warriors website. In this study, called Digital Publication, Complexity and Time, Youth Poets Take on the Informal Creep, I ask, how, if at all, is the complexity of the language young people are using in the context of one digital platform changing over time? So where have I been presenting these ideas? I've been presenting these ideas at the following conferences, and I'm currently in the process of writing up the findings. One of the conferences is upcoming in the winter 2020, the Literacy Research Association. So what's next? I'm working on a couple different projects with my colleagues here at the Graduate School of Education while I write my dissertation proposal. Those projects include one where we look at teachers' use of social media for professional development. I'm looking at climate change writing and how students might design climate change solutions. And finally, I'm working on a project that looks at open access digital publishing practices. So please get in contact with me if you're interested in collaboration. If you've got questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. My email is here. Thanks so much for getting to know me, and I hope to hear from you.
My name is Portman, and I'm a member of the Poetic Media Lab. I got my PhD at Stanford University in German Studies, and I also was a graduate fellow at CESTA for a year. And this year was actually great because I learned a lot of new things, and it also really helped me in identifying what I wanted to do next. And this is actually what I'm doing right now. So currently I'm a researcher at the University of Bremen in northern Germany, and there I'm at the Center for Media Communication and Information Research. And I'm here today to talk to you a bit about the project that I'm doing there right now, and that I'm doing in cooperation with the Poetic Media Lab. The project is called Free Speech and the Regulation of the Digital Public Sphere. It is a comparative analysis of the internet policy discussion in Germany and in the United States. And I'm doing that, I'm analyzing that with regards to a particular German anti-hate speech law, which is called NetzDG, or the long German title is Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz. So this law is particularly interesting to me since it shows the different approaches with regards to freedom of expression in the digital age in Germany/Europe, and on the other hand in the United States. But it also allows me to uncover some of the cultural and historical differences that led to those diverging approaches that we can see here. And so I do believe it's a media and communications project, very much so, but that has a strong kind of more philosophical and humanities core to it, an area studies core to it. So I'm doing this analysis based on two different text corpora. The first one consists of entries from IT blogs and IT websites from the US and Germany. So here we have some sort of an expert culture, so expert groups that put their opinions out there on these blogs or on those websites. The second one is a corpus consisting of newspaper articles from the 8 or 9 biggest and most important German newspapers. So here we sort of have the traditional media represented by newspapers. And what we're trying to do by using text data mining techniques is analyzing who the stakeholders are that get involved with this discussion about the NetzDG, what arguments they bring forward, and what kind of strategies more generally they pursue to push their agenda forward. And of course, the overarching idea is to see if those experts from the IT block sphere, if you will, do have an impact on the discussion that happens in those in the traditional media, so in those nationwide newspapers, and therefore then potentially in broader society. Yeah, I'm currently here in the United States, in California, actually, to see if we can also set up a corpus, a newspaper corpus that is comparable to what we already have in Germany. So I hope this is going to work out well, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, my name is Shai. I am a 4th-year PhD student at UW-Madison, and it's an honor being part of the Poetic Media Lab at Stanford. My project is part of my dissertation research on online Jewish learning, and what I'm mostly interested in is how people use digital platforms, online tools, to study Jewish texts in collaboration with other learners. And I'm basing this on the growth and interest in innovation in Jewish education and how learners are becoming more active in shaping their own learning, making it more relevant to their lives. And we also know there's an increase in number of online platforms that make all this content more available for learners today. And the goal of this research is to understand how these platforms create, or not, communities of practice and knowledge building communities around these Jewish texts. And so some other questions I'll be asking is, for example, how do learners engage in online Jewish learning in these spaces? How do they experience these learning through these platforms? What do they learn about Jewish texts, about themselves, and about other learners? I interviewed 9 adult learners for my research, and both men and women between different ages, different professions, denominations, etc. And I used sociocultural theories of learning to analyze my data. And my preliminary results show that learners are both consuming and both producing knowledge. So it's not one or the other. They're both consumers and producers. And as lifelong adult learners, they actively create connections between the text and their own life experiences, together with the people that they study with. The digital spaces provide learners not only access to these texts, But one of the things that my participants said that they found valuable for them was to continue this Jewish tradition of learning in a community. So it is important for me to note, these interviews were conducted before the COVID-19 crisis. And so I am asking myself how, if I do them again today, how that might change my findings due to the growth in online participation in the last couple of months. And if you do have any thoughts, questions, things you'd like to share, I would be very, very happy. And this is my email. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, my name is Cody. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in English here at Stanford. I'm working on a couple of projects associated with the Poetic Media Lab, but the one that I wanted to talk to you about today is one that I started very recently called the Rhetoric of Solidarity. In this project, I'm looking at the statement of solidarity as an emergent prose form. These statements, which became quite widespread in the aftermath of the police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, are those statements that you've probably seen online, on Twitter, on Facebook, in which their issuers, generally an institution of some sort or political figure, condemn racism and align themselves with the ideals of anti-racism. One of the reasons that I started this project was that I was becoming increasingly impatient with the statements of solidarity that I was reading. They all seemed the same to me, and I wanted to find out in what specifically their sameness consisted. So using some basic text mining techniques, I started by looking at 44 different statements of solidarity issued by 44 major companies, including Walmart, Google, Pepsi, Coke, McDonald's, Facebook, etc. One of the first things I did was I looked at the 25 most common words to appear in these statements. There's nothing inherently surprising about this list of words. They're the kind of abstractions that we would expect of such statements, and they certainly confirm the perception of certain rhetorical homogeneity in these statements. There was one thing that stuck out to me, though. Racism and injustice were two of the 25 most common words to appear in these statements, and they're often used to identify the problem. They're often used as the rallying point for these companies. Yet the word police, as in police violence or police brutality, appears only 5 times meaningfully, in a meaningful way. Which means that while there is a willingness and even an eagerness on the part of these companies to condemn racism and injustice, and to identify these as the broad problems that one pledges to fight against, there's also a seemingly disproportionate unwillingness to talk about the specific forms that this racism and injustice takes. These statements, in other words, don't descend beneath a certain level of abstraction. They speak about the problem in the broadest and least specific possible terms. So these are some of the things that I've found so far, and they're the kind of things that invite further interrogation. One of the things that I want to do next is to collect data on the public perception of these statements to figure out which statements people like the most, and what it is about these statements that they respond to most positively. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I'm happy to field any questions you might have.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lakmali, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Comparative Literature at Stanford University. Today, I would like to introduce you to my current Poetic Media Lab project, which is titled In Transit, the impact of visa restrictions on international students at Stanford University during the COVID-19 pandemic. The research question that has guided me in this research is, in what ways have international students at Stanford been impacted by visa-related laws and restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic? On March 20th, the Department of State temporarily suspended routine visa services at all US embassies and consulates. Even by mid-September 2020, visa services remain largely closed. As a result, a lot of students have not been able to return to the US to start their academic programs. According to the 2019 annual report published by the Bechtel International Student Center at Stanford, 25.64% of the Stanford student population in 2019 consisted of international students. This means almost a quarter of Stanford's student population might be dealing with visa-related issues. This project studies the various challenges that these international students face during the COVID-19 pandemic as a result of visa non-issuance, expired visas, travel restrictions, and related issues. The interviews contribute to an understanding of how COVID-19 has increased and made worse already existing inequalities and injustices in applying to and obtaining visas. This project is actually one element of a larger project on visa law and policy, which studies the impact of such laws on visa applicants' rights and dignities. And this is a continuation and extension of my dissertation research. I'm working on this project in collaboration with the Poetic Media Lab, the Stanford Historical Society Oral History Program, and the Stanford University Archives. I've currently designed this as a pilot project focusing on international student communities at Stanford University, but my hope is to expand and scale it up to cover a larger body of international students studying at institutions outside Stanford in future iterations of the project. My methodology is oral history. Interviews are conducted with 3 primary groups. The first is international undergraduate students, second being international graduate students, and the third, staff working with international students on visa-related issues. The recordings and transcriptions of the interviews will be made available digitally via the Oral History Project and the Stanford Archives. I have 2 potential outcomes for this project on completion, the first being the generation of a digital interview archive that captures the lived realities of international students facing visa-related issues during this time. The second is the generation of a digital map that uses interview data to analyze the relationship between the nature and degree of difficulties experienced by the applicant vis-a-vis their citizenship or country of residence. That's it from me. If you have any questions, any suggestions, any comments, please feel free to get in touch with me. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ovid Lina, and I'm a professor at Bucknell University in Spanish and Latin American Studies. I'm here to briefly talk to you about the Florentine Codex project, which is a project that is now a collaboration between Bucknell and CESTA Stanford with the help of, particularly of Quinn Dombrowski and Nelson, who has been a wonderful collaborator in this project. The Florentine Codex is an encyclopedia, if you will, one of the most thorough ones, often called an encyclopedia of Aztec culture. And it was written by this Franciscan friar named Bernardino de Sahagún in collaboration with indigenous Aztec people that he had trained, really as children, to become bilingual and to help translate this culture. And what Sahagún wanted, being a Franciscan friar, was to capture the culture of the Aztecs for evangelization purposes, to try to understand the Nahuatl language, and therefore to try to create a dictionary that would allow him to further his evangelization efforts. Of course, the native assistants and painters that worked with him left an imprint of their own in this text, especially through images. And as such, it's become paradoxically a book that both kept what we know about Aztec culture and with it tried to destroy it. The product of this Historia was 3-bound tomes, handwritten Nahuatl and Spanish from the 16th century in 12 books with 2,468 illustrations. The books are divided by subject matter. So book 1 is about the gods, book 7 is about astrology and natural philosophy of the Aztecs. You can see in both columns there, one is in Spanish and one is in Nahuatl, which is the language spoken by people in Mesoamerica at the time. these books, as you can see, the images have their own rhetoric, and that's what we are trying to privilege with our digital edition. As for us, Aztec knowledge takes center stage. And what I want to do with this digital edition is to have actually a way to foreground this indigenous way of understanding and preserving knowledge. So in a way, what we call this a decolonial approach, which really centers on the image, privileges the Nahuatl text, and relies on recent scholarship to annotate the translation by the Franciscan friar into Spanish in order to bring forth suppressions, omissions, mistranslations, westernizations, and really try to bring out the indigenous aspect of this text. We've been able to transcribe most of it with the aid of Quinn, who has helped us train transcribers, an automatic transcription tool, which has proven extremely accurate, and we're very happy with the results. We're also trying to keep track of the languages, as I'm going to produce another translation of the Nahuatl. And we're doing some data mining on certain entities to see what we can get eventually, especially when it comes to the images, which have in their own sense a lot of information stored in them. The presentation is still to be determined of this edition, but what we know is that it will be image-centered. In other words, the image won't move, but the text and the languages will. So hopefully we will be able to share with you the digital edition soon. Book 1 is coming. And we will start a new project that will try to create a glyphic dictionary, which is really, really exciting.
Okay, I think that's the end of the video. That was awesome. Nelson, should we clap, or I don't know. Okay.
You should, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Okay. In terms of questions, should we start by, yeah, really such a range of projects, and there were a lot of questions that came in throughout. And so maybe we can just start by going back to the beginning and moving through the different projects as questions came in. One of the first, there were actually 2 questions, both for the LIQ project, which is living in quarantine, right? Yes, okay. Bad with acronyms sometimes. Both Beth Seltzer and Oliver Rosales were interested in, maybe one of them could say their question, or we could read it from the thing. What do you want to do?
I mean, I'm looking at both questions. I'm happy to try to address them. And my colleagues Ellis and Farah are in the session now, so they can jump in. I think they're both basically the same question about the tech. I have to say the tech is extremely rudimentary and simple. Our project is basically a WordPress site. We run it through a widget called Elementor that makes things like just look pretty and easy to customize. We collect stories through a simple Google form. Well, a number of Google forms because we have them in different languages. To be honest, the origin of the project, our goal was never really to analyze the stories. We always approached the project as more of as a kind of like building a collecting effort. I should say it's a collecting effort. So we're trying to collect stories. We would be delighted if researchers would be interested in looking at the archive and doing the analysis, if they're so inclined. But this was never our goal with the project, to do that analysis. It was more like, let's collect stories. I really want to know, what's going on out there with people, how people are handling the pandemic. So our efforts from the get-go have been really about the collecting and kind of doing outreach. Collecting stories is actually not easy at all. you know, for a number of reasons. For the sake of time, I'm not going to get too much into that, but you know, so most of our efforts from, at least in the first 3 months of this project, have been about kind of finding ways to reach out to people and gather stories. So I don't know if that answers the question, but, you know, Beth and Oliver, like, I will, you know, the three of us would be completely delighted to, you know, talk to you guys about whatever, you know, those questions and any other questions you might have.
So I'm happy to hop in and answer the next question if that's what we're doing here. Is that right? Okay. So thanks for the question about text complexity and how we measure complexity when we're talking about student poetry. So I conducted this study as a part of a final project in the class Using Data to Describe the World with Sean Reardon, which means I was learning these methodologies while doing this work, something that a lot of us are doing. So I used R to analyze my text corpus, and I used the R package Quantita, and used two measures of complexity, which were Flesch-Kincaid and the automated readability index. So I'll say Flesch-Kincaid was really interesting to me because it was a measure of complexity I used before coming to Stanford as a reading teacher. So it's something that we use to help middle school students or elementary school students decide if a text is at their level. And so it was interesting to me to then use this to apply to a set of text. But it's interesting to note that both these packages were developed for prose, as most text packages are. It's really hard to use text packages to analyze the complexity of poetry, since we have a lot of different things in poetry that are hard to analyze just by looking at the number of words or the length of the words, for example. And so one of my major findings, you know, I could use one text package to see, since I was interested in change over time, I could see whether the student poetry was becoming more or less complex based on any given text package. But a major finding was that we really don't have solid methodologies to analyze really large corpora of poetry, and certainly not student poetry. So developing those methodologies to analyze those large corpora of poetry is something that's going to be an ongoing effort that I'm excited to be doing in my time here at Stanford with the Poetic Media Lab and beyond. And I think it's part of the reason why communities like these are so important, because we really are learning how to still do this type of work well. So thanks for the question.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I would like to answer the next question. It's a pretty simple question. Yes, sorry, there's a baby here crying. Yes, the learners are Jewish. It's just the people that I was able to reach out to, and that was through a Facebook group of Jewish learners and Jewish educators. So yes, the participants are Jewish.
There was also a question from, I had a question for LIQ and for, I think Cody, who's not here, but it's a question for the Poetic Media Lab more broadly. So the question for LIQ is about plans for archiving submissions, and the question for Poetic Media Lab is about the shared umbrella and organizational structure. So how projects come together under Poetic Media Lab.
Okay, about the archiving the stories. Yeah, we basically have, you know, the Google Forms. We're receiving this information. We compile, you know, all the, you know, well, here to clarify. So we have a submission form where we collect the stories, and I'll address Giovanna's question very briefly as well. You know, the idea is just that we're trying to get like as close a picture of like a real life under pandemic as we can. So we are basically just asking people to tell us what's up, essentially, you know, and they will kind of choose what they feel comfortable telling. We protect their identities, but when they submit their stories, we do ask some personal questions that they can actually opt out of if they don't want to ask questions about gender and, you know, income, but we do have those demographic questions. And those are all compiled in you know, basically as a XML file. You know, and those are not going to be part of the website. You know, that's not visible. We're protecting everyone's identities. But then what we do is just we publish the initials, you know, on the site and the stories, and that's pretty much how we are sharing the stories. I don't know if Alice wants to.
I mean, with regards to kind of where the archive is going, I mean, I think it's going to stay on our website right now, though we have had a conversation with the Stanford archivist. So perhaps later down the road, it can live on in another format as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I may just address May's question, is May still in the meeting, or is she? Okay. Yeah, about the, you know, the difference between Poetic Media Lab and Literary Lab, you know, I think that's a really good question. I do think that the emphasis in Poetic Media Lab, as you know, as Amir you know, mentioned in the beginning, is more of the creative side, so that we are kind of, a lot of our projects are kind of creating the corpus. You know, or kind of engaged in that type of activity, but not all of them are necessarily doing that. So I think in some ways that is accidental. You know, I know I came to the Poetic Media Lab initially just by kind of, you know, force of destiny, I guess, where, you know, Daniel, who is in the meeting, you know, he was finishing his PhD, and, you know, we had a conversation, he told me about it, and I started, you know, working with Faiza on Lacuna. You know, I think one difference that the Poetic Media Lab is, especially this year, is we're working with a program in the Global Studies Department called Epic Fellowship, where we basically receive 10 fellows, you know, from community colleges who are working on various projects. And this year we are really trying to bring them closer to CESTA, you know, so the Poetic Media Lab is very interested in basically working, you know, with these fellows. So we're, I would say that if there is a difference, and I can't speak too much about the Literary Lab, just to know based on what I know, I think we're emphasizing the kind of creative aspect and the collaborative aspect, but maybe Amira.
Yeah, maybe I could add one thing to that, Nelson, is that at the Poetic Media Lab, and then I think Amir would, you know, could talk more about it, is that we also build tools that could be used, you know, as educational tools. I think that's another thing, part of the poiesis that Amir had mentioned. And, you know, that was the whole goal of Lacuna project, a social annotation that was used in classrooms. And you know, that's what we do with Epic Fellowship, is these are a group of community college instructors, and we want to you know, bring technology to the classroom, projects that they could use in their teaching. So we always sort of, you know, anytime we design a project, we sort of keep in mind how the practical aspects of how it will be used and to make it user friendly. So I think, but yeah, maybe Nika, you want to represent the Lit Lab and sort of showcase. Otherwise, I think a lot of projects could be, there could be overlap between them. But that's one aspect that I think may be different. And it's just not research, but also the praxis.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what happens in Poetic Media Lab private meetings, so I can't speak so much to the differences. But one of the things that I really was interested in while watching the presentation is how much these projects that are under the PML umbrella seem to like toggle around the intersection between publishing, pedagogy, and research. And I guess and they do seem related. The last project on the, is it the Florentine Codex and not the Florence? Okay, the Florentine Codex. I mean, the praxis and methodology that you're developing seems to have a connection to the, in Amir Eshel's presentation, the sort of the Hannah Arendt educational platform, which itself is a mode of presenting research. So all of those things, so I don't know. I would say that one thing about the Lit Lab, how I understand the Lit Lab is that it's really a text, like it's really kind of at its heart, it's sort of like a text mining mad scientist laboratory or something. And so it's really like digging into like kind of trippy methodological possibilities of text mining. And so, I mean, yeah, it has also like a kind of research that goes out through publications, but I think when one of the things I remember someone telling me about the Lit Lab is its mission is not about education or pedagogy. It's really kind of a research focused lab.
There's another wonderful question. I don't see the name, but it just says host. What tools that we wish that existed and don't exist yet, other than Lacuna. For myself, and I'm sure others can speak to, there's obviously a great list of wish list that we, would wish that could exist. But I think one thing I've noticed in my research is there are not many tools that support different languages, like including Arabic. And that was really surprising to me, like even just to get, a web editor that could support the language. And I was initially, coding, always used Sublime Text for my projects, and only when I had to type in Arabic, I realized, oh, Sublime Text actually does not support Arabic. So I had to go look for things. And so I feel like that sort of made me aware that how, English-centric all our tools and technology is, and to be able to create even just the same tools that would support different languages, including Arabic, which, I would think it's one of the largest languages in the world. Like, if that is not included, then, I'm sure a lot of people who are working with different languages face the same problems.
So maybe just one thing to underline something you said, Nika, which I think is extremely important. In terms of the mission, I think there are various ways to think about how knowledge emerges. One central, mode is by looking at what's already there. Libraries, archives, in archaeology, you go, you dig out whatever, is left from, a city or a street or whatever. But there are also, ways to think about the emergence of knowledge, which are tied much more, closely to the creative process, in which it's not clear at all what happens when you start, when you get going. So if we think about, all the projects we heard about today, it's not at all clear, what the outcome will be. But then in the course of conducting the project or working on the project, at least from my experience, wonderful new insights, emerge, and bodies of knowledge emerge, which were never there before. So going back to the conversations, I had with Todd Presner in 2001, when we thought about, Berlin and Walter Benjamin, we never thought that this will turn out in a project in which Todd studies, tweets during the Arab Spring in Cairo and looking at demonstrations and where demonstrations occur in real time, and research questions, we would never think about, not, by a long shot, in 2001. So I think, speaking about, crazy scientists laboratories, I think this is something, both laboratories share. And a lot has to do with the personal energy and dynamism, which, happens when people come together, and life, in quarantine is a great example for this. But just one. Yeah. and maybe, to add one other word, which for me personally is extremely important, and that is that, by doing the kind of work we're trying to do, we remind ourselves, and hopefully we remind the university as well, about the importance of teaching, the importance of our educational and pedagogical mission.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful that we're all conducting research and have research questions, and we get all kinds of research-related grants, and Stanford is a research institution, and there's a lot of, emphasis on this. I'm afraid that in the course of putting all the emphasis on research, we often forget, a core mission of the university, which is really education and teaching and being invested in the life, in the future, in the fate of those who come to the university, be it undergraduate students or graduate students. So at least my own hope is that, the work we're doing is a way to remember this core value, this core mission.
If I may just add a note to that, and also in response to Giovanna, I think one speaking strictly about life in quarantine, but one of the big turning points of the project was really when we realized that there was a potential for the project to be used as kind of a community engagement tool and in a teaching tool. We are actually, this is the biggest project we're working on right now, for Life in Quarantine for the fall quarter, is a collaboration with a community college professor down in the San Diego area, where, he actually reached out to us, and he wants to use the archive in his classroom, to teach his class on global competence. He finds the fact that we have stories in different languages and from different communities, people from all over the United States, are also kind of, we have that variety, but also like a single theme really, which is broad enough, of course, life in the pandemic, but he finds that, a rich resource. So the fact that we kind of got that sort of validation from a teacher, who saw that value right away, really gave the project a sort of new direction around June, and we kind of, we have, the project has grown into basically a big collaborative effort. Once we realized that, we could do more than just collect the stories. I think it's like collecting the stories, but also kind of using the stories to engage people in some sort of like a debate or, some activity about what it is that we are all going through. I think people see the value in that. And, so like my advice, the last couple of weeks, we've received like some inquiries from people who want to start new projects in the lab, and they brought like their rough ideas to me. And one of the things that I recommended to them is like, try to figure out like how you can engage the public, I think it's important, and I also think that adds a sort of, it extends the life expectancy of a project. It would be like very different if we were just collecting stories. That's all really that Life in Quarantine is about. We probably have run out of steam, speaking like very honestly about it. But the fact that we are doing that, but we are also engaged with all these other initiatives. If you go on our website, you see, all the different stuff that we've been doing with the undergrads and the communities and the collaborators. That definitely has added so much more like life, to what we're doing, and it keeps us motivated, keeps us engaged. So yeah, so maybe it's not like a question of like what a specific feature of the digital that's missing. It's more like, how can we, just use what we have for collaboration. I think the potential really is there, so that's my 2 cents.
It looks like we have about 5 more minutes. So if there's someone else who wants to jump in with questions, now is a good time. while you think about it, I will also preview that our next CESTA event is on September 29th from 1 to 3. We're doing lightning talks with Cider. So it's a co-hosted working group, and there'll be 2 meetings this quarter, one on September 29th from 12 to 1:30 and one on October 27th. And there's more information about that on the CESTA website. And we are also soliciting contributors to that. So if you'd like to present at the first session, the cesta.stanford.edu webpage will direct you to a form. Cecil Brown is clapping. Do you want to unmute? No. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I guess I have, it's just a random question for the project working on the Florentine Codex. I just following the presentation, that project looked like something I really want to interact with on the website. And I'm someone who really likes reading on paper. I know a lot of humanists are, even though in DH, we also spend a lot of time with the computers, especially right now. So I guess that's just a question, like a very speculative question in terms of thinking through how to make the transition from like analog on paper to digital, but then sort of back to getting on paper through, is that, how would you go about doing that? Would it be through just printer views? Is that something in terms of all of your publishing projects you've been thinking about?
Oh, Nika, so Obed, he left the meeting. He would be really the best person to answer this question. I worked with him and Quinn, actually, she's also not here. Quinn is still very actively working with him, you know, basically training transcribers to read the Nahuatl text and the Latin and the Spanish. You know, I am not as involved with the project anymore now just because of time. I thought I could do everything, but no. But, you know, my understanding is that, you know, this is a digital edition, you know, and the Florentine Codex, you know, in particular is, it has like a really interesting editorial history. It has several editions. None of them do what Obed is trying to do now, especially with the glyphs, you know, but at the same time, you know, the Getty Institute, they have this ginormous project basically going on simultaneously with Obed's, and they have, you know, like the funding situation is very different, but in the book as like an art history type of project. So they're very interested in the images, but they're also not interested in how the images intersect with the text, you know, whereas with Obed, he's very interested in seeing like how the images really hide, so to speak, text, you know, in the sense that the glyphs are meaningful. They are meaningful, like now what, you know, cosmological concepts that most people will just look at and won't even, you know, understand. So he's kind of trying to retrieve a lot of that content. And from what I understand, it's really like projected to be a sort of digital edition. It has like a decolonial potential in the sense that, you know, this is something that you can give back to basically the, you know, modern day Nahuas in Mexico as part of their legacy. And in a way, they would be reclaiming that. But yeah, as far as like the printing and kind of making that way back, I'm not sure. But you know, I can connect you with Obed if you want to continue the conversation. You know,
yeah. I might have a one question or a comment that goes back to what Giovanna was asking. So I'm actually not so much looking for tools that haven't been invented yet, but I'm always thinking that learning the technical skills is so important. And I'm just thinking I didn't do enough of that while I was a grad student. Although the CESTA fellowship was really wonderful and spectacular, I should have done so much more. Because now I'm teaching and I'm busy doing other things, and it's very difficult to continuously, get the skills in and grow further. So I'm just wondering how we can, on the one hand, give grad students even more possibilities to learn those skills, and on the other hand, how to offer opportunities for both grad students and people who teach to continuously learn and analyze data and do text mining and so on and so forth, whatever they want to do. So I think CESTA is already great at that, but maybe you can even make it better because it's so central.
Could I actually respond to that? Because I think about that a little bit, because I'm I'm using computational research in my dissertation, but I have like zero coding skills, but I've been, a member of the Lit Lab for a while, but like not a text miner. And right now I've been working on a project through CESTA and the Lit Lab with 2 undergrad RAs and Mark Algie Hewitt. And I had a lot of anxiety in advance about the extent to which I could do computational work if I wasn't like a Python coding whiz. And I met with someone earlier this year who said, like, you are bringing a whole range of other skill sets to the table. Like, you're a literary historian, you're a close reader, you can interpret and analyze data patterns, you can interpret tables and graphs. And this person also said, like, the key difference is that you can like really acknowledge your collaborators in a way that maybe humanities, I don't know, my like perspective on the humanities is like star system and mostly publishing solo research. So the idea of like a collaborative groups, I don't know. I mean, I'm a grad student, but it feels pretty new. And so that's, I'm in my 4th year doing my PhD, and I really like don't have time to do everything. And am I ever going to learn Python as well as somebody who like is focused on learning Python? Absolutely not. And so I really do think that the idea of like coming together with people with different skills, and also like I found that to be really like liberating. And so I think that there's like a trade-off between like skills and being like, I am the only voice in this project, and then also finding ways of pursuing your own research interests in the context of a like knowledge producing community, which is, I mean, the intersection between pedagogy and humanities, collaborative humanities research, I think is kind of the way that I've been thinking about it.
Can I briefly say something there too, which is that I really love that everyone is emphasizing the collaboration and the sort of multiplying factor of that. But we are actually trying to do a little bit of organizing around skill set building. And Jens, this is certainly something you can avail yourself of. We'll be sending out an email soon about work groups forming that are oriented on picking up specific skills, particularly in the context of having lots of other challenges. So getting a group of people who are also working on picking up that skill and using that as a focus point. But I do think that there is a lot of picking and choosing that we end up having to do because you can't pick up everything. But with that, I won't go on too long because I know we're sort of out of time, but it would be lovely if we can actually get a little bit of collaborative learning going on as well.
I think we're out of time, so maybe we can formally close. Thank you so much, everybody, for staying until the very, very end. Thank you to the Poetic Media Lab, all the presenters, for the really awesome presentation and video. It was so cool. And thank you to Giovanna and Amanda and everyone at Laura. Thank you for everyone for coming. And we'll see you in, when will we see you? We'll see you at Distant Reading in the Law or at the CIDR workshops. And the info for that is on the website. So thanks so much.